Now, that also speaks to a concern heard around the world, that President Trump's attacks on the press are also giving a green light to autocrats, putting journalists in literal danger elsewhere. Well, joining us from Washington is Gene Policinski, President and Chief Operating Officer of the Freedom Forum Institute, and he's a co-founding editor of USA Today. And Gene, of course, President Trump's supporters are going to say this is just further proof the media is united against him, and they're overstating the situation. How do you answer those critics?
Well, I think the fact that the editorials come out on a single day is less important than the fact that these are all locally written editorials. And the most that I've seen deal with issues of the value of a free and independent press in their specific community. They're not really going after Trump. I mean, he has amped up the atmosphere with this inflated rhetoric. But I think the real point of today is to say to people, a free and independent press is your guardian in your community. It speaks for you. We live and work where you live and work. So I hope that's the message today, and that the fact that this is against some hot rhetoric of enemies of the people, which is totally out of place and mislaid, and fake news, which has no real meaning anymore. That, to me, is secondary to this larger message about a free and independent press.
Gene, there are sort of two major issues here. There's one about actually putting journalists' lives in danger, a very practical, real threat that we know is a reality in countries like Turkey and certainly right here in the Middle East. And then there's the notion of simply discrediting the media, of having Americans think that the media itself, that the press itself cannot be trusted. How do you fight something like that?
Well, I think you fight it first by the work. I think that, you know, there's a certain group of people who are so caught up in this overheated rhetoric that you're not going to persuade them with 1 day or 50 days of editorials. You're going to have to continue to do the work and fairly and honestly report. So that's the first thing. But I have to admit, I have some sympathy for sort of putting a stake in the ground and saying, wait a minute, let's cool down the rhetoric here. Let's talk about the meaning and the role of a free press. And I'm so glad you framed it also in context of the world. You know, the United States for decades, if not centuries, has been a beacon of press freedom protected by the First Amendment. And I think when people, autocrats and would-be dictators around the world, see this kind of rhetoric and attack on the press here, it emboldens them to do the same in a country where the press is not as protected as it is here.
And I want to talk about your statement about toning down the rhetoric, because there are those, and I'm not speaking about supporters of President Trump, quite the opposite, who say there is a danger that the press, or certain sectors of the press, feels it almost has to ramp up its own rhetoric to match that of President Trump. It has to be even more adversarial than it's been in the past. How do you respond to that idea?
Well, you know, I think press is going to be under attack by President Trump and others on any given day. And again, you know, I hope what happens today is that message gets out about a free and independent press. It reminds people, it raises their sort of alert to the fact that this can produce fringe on left and right to become violent. And then everybody's back to work. Let's go back to work doing the job that we should be doing. So, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong on editorial pages, which is overwhelmingly, by the way, where these messages appear, not in the news columns. They're on the editorial pages. That's where newspapers traditionally speak. You know, journalists are often not comfortable being the story. But I think given the atmospherics, it's okay to take a day to day and be the story for a moment on your editorial page.
Gene, some of the things that we're talking about are such big picture pillars. I mean, certainly free press is such a pillar of a democracy. Whenever the Trump administration is over, the kind of talk, the rhetoric that's happening now, this discrediting of the press, is that something that you think will really end with this administration? Or is that a sort of mentality switch that's going to be hard to get rid of for many years to come?
Well, you know, this is not the first time the press has been in the crosshairs of an administration. I'm old enough to remember Richard Nixon and his enemies list and his vice president going out and attacking the press. So this comes along periodically. You know, the thing that I'm almost more concerned is that with economic disruption, there are fewer journalists to demonstrate every day the value of a free press. So another outgrowth of the today, and I hope the work that people do, is to remind people that one of the ways you support a free press is that it's not free. You have to pay for it, and that you ought to be buying subscriptions. You ought to show your support in other ways. You know, the whole point of having a free press is to represent you and me in places that we can't typically go. We don't have the time or the expertise. and to come back and give us information so we can make decisions about our own self-governance. And I think we need to keep the eye on the ball. And frankly, today, I hope, starts a new campaign. That's something we've been trying to do at the museum for 2 decades. It's good to have a bunch of allies today to say that same story, the value of a free and independent press.
Right, and liberal and conservative papers alike doing that today.